Africa remains one of the countries most plagued by gender-based violence, a devastating reality that undermines the fabric of our society. As we mark the beginning of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, this year's United Nations theme, Unite, Invest to Prevent Violence Against Women and Girls, challenges us to critically assess the systemic failures that perpetuate the scourge. Now, joining us for this conversation is Sibongile Ndashe, the Executive Director of the Initiative for Strategic Litigation in Africa, who has been at the forefront of advocating for justice and accountability in cases of gender-based violence. Sibongile, appreciate your time. Thank you so much for speaking to us. So let's start off with South Africa's statistic as having amongst the highest numbers or highest incidents of gender-based violence. What causes this?
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. There are a number of factors that contribute to the extremely high levels of violence. One of them is discrimination, inequality, which is discrimination that is based on gender. And this is something that exists kind of globally. It's not like we are the country that is most unequal, but the way in which this manifests in intimate partnership, we see quite a number of intimate partner violence. The inability to accept or understand that women have autonomy over their bodies, and that whether people are in relationship, including marriages, that they have a right to say no to sex, but also that the other things when we talk about physical violence, control over decisions that they make when they can come home or not come home. But some of the things are about how this violence is enabled by our families, society, and even law officials like the police who are supposed to respond to it. It's not only enabled, it is understood, accepted, and even at times legitimized. So people find it easier to understand how violence can be an acceptable form of punishment when it is meted against women who are seen to be misbehaving or doing something that's outside in a way that will not be accepted, for example, when someone beat up his friend, or his brother, but somehow there is a level of tolerance or understanding. And so that's why people think it's a legitimate question to ask why someone has been physically assaulted. It's like, what did you do, to bring this to yourself?
That should not even be a factor, should it? But it also raises the question, Sibongile, about how familiar are women with their rights, their own rights, right? Now, I'm of the opinion, and I stand to be guided, you're the expert, that if you do not know your rights as an individual or as a woman in this particular instance, right, then you are unable to claim those rights. So, for instance, if you've grown up seeing or observing women around you, potentially your own mother, being beat up by your father or her partner, and it's perceived to be all right, then you're likely to accept it. So there's a huge number of women who go abused because they do not know, I'd imagine, that they shouldn't be abused, and it is their right not to be abused.
There is a thing that can be said about legal empowerment, that people go to workshops and trainings and then they understand that. So that is an important part of it. But we talk about people who know about this, but they are still in abusive relationships. So knowledge of the law or of one's rights is not sufficient to protect one from violence, because what happens is, do you believe that you have these rights? Do you believe that authorities can help to defend you? There are many women who are in abusive relationships who have gone to their families to explain that this is the case, and they sit in family meetings where they are begged, to go back to the perpetrator, because it's important to keep a family. Families need both of their children together and all of that. So there are a number of contributing factors that make us unable to prevent violence even before it has happened. So it's not only just the person not knowing their rights, it's about all of these other things that conspire to keep women in these relationships. We talk about the impact of race, class, and all of those things in this society of ours. And gender-based violence is one of those things that are able to transcend that. It happens to the richest woman, it happens to the poorest woman. And there may be different things of what happens, the exacerbating impact of poverty on how people experience violence and how they respond to it. But it's not like money or your level of education that can sometimes insulate one from violence. We live in a country that accepts that violence is a way of being, in relationships, that it is something that happens. And that's why part of the big things that we'll have to do is to invest on preventing, this violence. Because for as long as we do not believe and we have got all of these structures in society that conspire to normalize violence, legal empowerment on its own is not going to be the thing. It is important, but there are all sorts of things. In the prevention strategy, in the National Strategic Plan, we talk about where we would need to start doing this, from kind of basic, education. We have to talk to young people, whether it's young women or boys, about how important it is to respect, themselves, respect each other, but to make it not tolerable, that violence is not the way we resolve dispute, and that it is okay, for someone to say, I want to end a relationship. That a huge part of it is that you will have to learn to deal with the disappointment of a relationship that does not go. This is a conversation that people are exposed to. Young people hear this, is after you did so much for her, you paid for this, you paid for that, how can she just go and start another relationship? And when people hear that this is acceptable, it's an acceptable way of responding to an end of a relationship, that's how we are normalizing it. And sometimes people do this without really understanding what the consequences are of having this conversation in front of young people, because that's what they hear, and that's how we are here.
So, Sibongile, let's look at a cost-benefit analysis, right? The cost of dealing with the perpetrator of gender-based violence versus the cost of prevention. Now, whatever budgets are available, and you talk about what needs to be done, the engagement of young people, and I assume there's very little of it that's happening at the moment. But what would be the value of prevention versus trying to cure this plague that we call gender-based violence?
What do you mean by trying to cure it? Like prevention versus trying to cure it?
What I'm saying is, as part of the strategy in dealing with gender-based violence, there's the engagement of the victims and obviously of those that have perpetrated. But there's also, as you talk about, the opportunity to engage with young people before they become violent, before they become abusers of women or of their partners. So I'm trying to get from you an analysis, if you will, of the two sides to the story.
Right. So in the National Strategic Plan, the way it is currently drafted is that there are 6 pillars that we have committed to as a country, and we are saying this is what we need to invest in. So that's where the beginning of the cost-benefit analysis argument starts. We have the coordination leadership of this response, which is sitting at the highest level. The president is the champion. You've got the interministerial committee. You have the Council on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide. So we need to have the institutional framework that is capable of responding. And then we come to what you are talking about. There is a pillar that deals with prevention that tells us this has to be across all aspects of society. And how we need to engage with it, that it's in our education system, it's our places of employment, in our society, everywhere. And then the third pillar is the criminal justice response, that we need to have institutions that are able to do this. So these are not an either or, whether we work to prevent violence or whether we work to have institutions that are capable of responding when violence has happened. What we are saying is it's usually too late, when the violence has occurred, to go to the authorities to say someone has been murdered or someone has been brutally assaulted.
obviously things that should have happened. Looks like we've run short of time, Sibongile. I would have liked to have carried on the conversation, but certainly appreciate the insights that you've given us. And hopefully, as 16 days of activism starts on the 25th of November all the way through to 10th of December, that we will enjoy some progress.